The silent ship captain Vekthar of the Kelthari Imperial Survey Corps had seen many strange things in 40 years of deep space exploration, but nothing quite like this. The vessel hung in the void like a corpse, its hull scarred by micrometeorite impacts and radiation burns. No lights, no heat signature, no electromagnetic emissions of any kind. By every measure known to galactic science, it was a derelict, a tomb floating in the darkness between stars. Scanners confirmed total system failure, his sensor officer reported, her crystalline voice tinged with curiosity. Power grid offline. Life support offline. Communications offline. Captain, this ship has been dead for decades. Vekthar studied the alien craft on his view screen. It was crude by Kelthari standards, blocky and inefficient, but there was something about its design that spoke of purpose, of determination. The markings on its hull were in an unknown script, but his translation AI eventually produced results. Wanderer's Hope, United Earth Colonial Fleet. Earth, Vekthar murmured. The Kelthari had heard rumors of this species. Young, aggressive, recently emerged into space. But they'd never made contact. How long has it been adrift? Based on the decay patterns and stellar drift. At least 47 standard years, sir. 47 years. Vekthar felt his scales prickle with unease. Whatever crew had boarded this vessel was long dead. Still, salvage protocols were clear. His team would board, document the wreckage, and determine what had befallen these humans. The boarding party assembled quickly. Vekthar led them personally through the airlock connection, their suits' lights cutting through absolute darkness. The moment they entered the human ship, something felt wrong. Temperature readings are odd, his engineering specialist said. The ship is cold, barely above absolute zero in most sections. But there are pockets of residual heat. Very faint, but they shouldn't exist after this long. They moved through corridors thick with frost. Everything was silent, still, dead. But as they penetrated deeper, Vekthar began to notice details that made his analytical mind race with questions. Cables had been stripped from walls and rerouted. Entire sections of bulkhead had been carefully removed, not torn by catastrophe but methodically disassembled. In one chamber they found what appeared to be a makeshift greenhouse, long dead but clearly tended for years. The arrangement spoke of desperate ingenuity. Captain, you need to see this. Vekthar followed the voice to what appeared to be the ship's central hub. His helmet light swept across the walls and he stopped breathing. They were covered in writing. Thousands upon thousands of words in the human script, but also in drawings, diagrams, mathematical equations. It was like stepping into the mind of an entire civilization compressed into one room. What is all this? Someone whispered. Knowledge, Vekthar said softly. They were teaching, preserving. He moved closer, his translator working frantically. Lessons in engineering, medicine, philosophy, stories, and dates, so many dates, marking the passage of years in careful tallies. His engineering specialist was examining a junction box that had been completely rebuilt, with what appeared to be components from a dozen different systems. Captain, this is impossible. They took parts from the reactor cooling system, the navigation computer, even the hull plating, and built... I don't even know what this is. Some kind of emergency power distribution network? It's crude, inefficient, but it worked, Vekthar finished. They found the bodies in the crew quarters, dozens of them, carefully laid out in what was clearly a memorial chamber. Each had been preserved as well as possible in the cold, wrapped in ship materials. Small tokens lay with them, photos, written messages, personal items. Someone had cared for these dead, honored them, even when survival itself must have been a daily struggle. And then, in a sealed section near the ship's core, they found something that made Vekthar's blood run cold. Heat, faint but unmistakable. Seal breach, his security officer called out. No, wait. Not a breach. The seal is intentional. There's an inner airlock. Vekthar's hands trembled as he accessed the control panel. It was dead like everything else, but he could see the manual override. Someone had welded it shut from the inside. Recently. Well, recently in relative terms. Are you saying... His sensor officer couldn't finish the sentence. Vekthar studied the readings again. The faint heat signature. The deliberate seal. The protected inner chamber. I'm saying someone might still be alive in there. The statement hung in the frozen air like an impossibility. The Kelthari prided themselves on their logic, their reason, their understanding of the universe's laws, and every law they knew said that life could not exist in this dead ship. But humans, Vecthar was beginning to understand, didn't seem to care much about what was supposed to be impossible. "Get me cutting torches," he ordered, "and alert the medical bay. We're going to need them ready." As his team worked to open the inner chamber, Vecthar looked back at the walls covered in human writing, at the bodies laid out with such care, at the impossible modifications that had kept some semblance of life in this vessel for decades beyond reason. What kind of species, he wondered, refuses to die even when death would be mercy? He was about to find out. The price of tomorrow. The inner chamber's seal broke with a hiss of stale air. Vecthar's suit sensors immediately detected oxygen, thin, barely breathable, but present, impossible. His team moved forward cautiously, lights sweeping through the darkness. The chamber was small, jury-rigged from what must have once been a cargo hold. Every surface was covered in insulation, stripped from walls throughout the ship, melted plastic, even what appeared to be shredded uniforms. In the center sat a crude heating unit cobbled together from reactor components barely glowing. And around it, wrapped in layers of thermal blankets, were 3 figures. They were so still that Vecthar thought they were dead. Then one moved. "Wait," his medical officer said urgently. "Life signs. Faint but stable. Captain, there are people alive in here." Not people, Vecthar realized with shock. Children. Or rather, what had once been children. They looked to be in their 50s now. Faces weathered beyond their years, bodies thin from malnutrition. But alive. Against every odd, alive. "Get them to medical, now." As his team carefully moved the survivors, Vecthar noticed 2 more figures in the shadows. These ones were still. An elderly human male and female seated against the wall holding hands. They wore crude versions of what might have been officer uniforms, patched and repatched over decades. On the wall beside them, written in careful script, were words his translator processed. "The burning protocol. We burned the ship to light tomorrow." "Captain," his engineering specialist's voice was shaken, "I've analyzed the modifications throughout the vessel. They systematically cannibalized 90% of the ship. The hull, the engines, the computers, everything. They burned it section by section, literally burned it, to generate heat and power for this one chamber. It must have taken decades. The precision required, the knowledge of exactly what they could sacrifice and when. They were engineers," Vecthar said quietly, looking at the 2 bodies. The crew. His data specialist had accessed what remained of the ship's logs. "Captain, I've recovered fragments. The ship suffered a catastrophic reactor failure 3 months into their journey. 73 people aboard. No FTL capability. They were traveling at sublight speed to a colony world. When the reactor died, they were centuries away from their destination. Centuries." Vecthar felt the weight of that word. "They knew they'd never make it." "They knew they'd never make it," the specialist corrected. "But the log entries..." "Captain, they planned it all out." The senior crew voted unanimously. They called it the burning protocol. They would keep 3 children alive, the youngest aboard, no matter what it took. They taught them everything. Engineering, medicine, agriculture. They gave them the ship piece by piece, burning it for warmth and power. Every adult knew they were sacrificing themselves, but they did it anyway. For 47 years, they kept those children alive. In Medical Bay, Vecthar watched through the observation window as his doctors worked on the survivors. One of them was conscious now, eyes wide with confusion and fear at the alien faces surrounding her. "It's all right," Vecthar said through the translator, keeping his voice soft. "You're safe now. You're going to survive." The human woman, though she'd been a child when the ship died, stared at him. "Marcus?" she whispered. "Elena? Are they the 2 in the chamber?" Vecthar asked gently. "Were they the last?" She nodded, tears streaming down her weathered face. "They kept us alive. All of them did. Every single adult on this ship gave everything so we could see another sun. Marcus and Elena were the last. They said our lives were humanity's promise, that we don't abandon tomorrow no matter how dark today becomes." Over the following days, as the survivors recovered, they told their story, how the crew had debated for weeks after the reactor failed, how they'd voted, how they'd made their choice, how engineer Marcus Chen and medical officer Elena Rodriguez had volunteered to be the last, to teach the final lessons, to ensure the children understood not just how to survive, but why. They made us memorize everything, one survivor explained. Every technical manual, every medical procedure, every story from Earth. They said if we were going to be humanity's ambassadors, we needed to carry all of it with us. The good and the bad, the failures and the triumphs. Vector accessed the recovered logs obsessively. He read entries from crew members as they made peace with their fate. Scientists who taught children calculus in the freezing dark. Farmers who grew crops in impossible conditions until their hands froze. Artists who painted on bulkheads until they couldn't hold a brush. Ensuring the children knew that beauty mattered too. And through it all, the burning protocol. Each section of the ship carefully calculated, rationed, sacrificed. A propulsion module burned to heat the chamber for 5 years. Computer cores melted down for their conductive materials. Hull plating stripped and converted into tools. 47 years of controlled destruction, all for 3 lives. Why? Vector found himself asking one survivor. You were children. You didn't choose this voyage. Why did they think you were worth so much sacrifice? The woman, Sarah Chen, daughter of Marcus Chen, born aboard the Wanderer's Hope, looked at him with ancient eyes and a weathered face. Because that's what humans do, Captain. We plant trees we'll never sit under. We build futures we'll never see. Every one of those 70 adults chose to die so that 3 children they barely knew could live. Not because we were special, because tomorrow is always worth the price. Vector had the ship towed back to Keltari space. It was against protocol, it was barely holding together, but he refused to leave it behind. The Wanderer's Hope deserved to be remembered. When his report reached the Imperial Council, it spread like radiation through the galactic community. Within months, every spacefaring species knew the story of the human colony ship. The 3 survivors became ambassadors, sharing their story, carrying with them the message that 70 people had died to deliver. Humanity, the galaxy learned, was not to be feared for their weapons or their aggression. They were to be respected for something far more powerful. Their absolute, unshakable belief that tomorrow was worth any sacrifice today. The Kelthari erected a memorial station at the coordinates where they'd found the Wanderer's Hope. On it, translated into every known galactic language, were the words that Marcus Chen and Elena Rodriguez had written on the chamber wall in their final hours. The burning protocol. We burned the ship to light tomorrow. And in the cold dark between stars, humanity's promise burned on.